Hey, welcome to this next video. So you should now have a good understanding, at least a bit more of an understanding around the importance of knowing DNS. Now, we obviously didn't go into the details around DNS. Now, we've got other videos on other courses that will go into a little bit more detail specifically about how to use DNS, how to create DNS records, but at least understanding DNS and how it works within the context of Active Directory and the domain controller is actually quite important because it's going to help you with troubleshooting things as well. There is a section in this course around the troubleshooting of Active Directory and domain controllers, and DNS is one area that, if you're familiar with it, will help you to at least understand perhaps why a computer is not connecting to the domain controller, perhaps why a computer is having issues on the network. It could be because of something like DNS, where it's not transferring the actual host name to the IP or vice versa correctly. Now, something that's important is when it comes to DNS is understanding a computer on the network, of course, gets itself an IP address from a DHCP environment, right? So we've got our computer right here. This is our domain controller. This is a domain controller running an older version of Windows Server, but the process is the same on a Windows Server 2019. But I've got a server, right? A server gets an IP address manually. Generally, you will go in and set up a static IP, but of course, computers on a network will get their IPs from a DHCP server. And of course, in that DHCP server, you're going to allocate a range of IPs that you want to push out to computers on your network, as well as the DNS IPs that will be pushed out to the network. And what's going to happen is when your computer, a computer on the network that you're trying to bind to Active Directory, tries to connect to AD to essentially authenticate and log in, it's going to go and query the DNS, right? So it's always good practice to have more than one DNS. So 2 or more DNS IPs available is preferred. Secondly, that's also true of domain controllers. So let's just talk about DNS first. So if I'm inside my start menu, all right, I'm going to go into, where am I going? I'm going into my network. All right. Now I've got my primary NIC. Okay. This one here. And I'm going to go into my IP version 4. You'll see that I've got my IP address. This is the IP address of this domain controller in this lab environment. And then I've got a preferred DNS and an alternate DNS. Now in my case, both of these DNS servers are also domain controllers, because you can actually configure the DNS module within your domain controller, but you can also configure DNS separately to a domain controller. But you'll see that there are 2 DNS in here. One is my primary, one is my alternate. So what this is going to mean is that when this computer, when this server, any computer on your network is going to try and query your DNS server, it's going to point to your first one first. It's going to go and look for that record in your primary DNS server. If that primary DNS server is unavailable or can't find a record, it'll go to your secondary or your alternate DNS server and then your next one. So you can go into advanced right here, and under DNS, you can actually see that you can add multiple DNS servers into here. All right, so you can add a lot more than just 2. So it's generally good practice to have a pool of DNS servers in here so that your computers know the order in which to go and query DNS. So this is true of static servers. In our case, I've got a domain controller or any server that you're statically putting in your DNS IPs, one or the second one, and then on DHCP, allocating multiple DNS IPs to the computers and to the devices out on a network. Now, this is true of DNS, but it's also true of DHCP. Now, I did mention that in my case, both 30 and 31 are both domain controllers. So they're both running the AD instance of the domain within the domain controller, and they're also running DNS. So that also is true when querying your domain controller. When querying Active Directory, it needs to know where to go. Now, imagine the scenario where the primary domain controller becomes unavailable, right? So let's just say I've got my domain controller right here, and I've got Active Directory, and I've got all of my stuff that's listed within Active Directory. What happens in the event where a computer, for example, loses connection to your domain controller, there would actually be a bit of trouble, right? Because a computer on the network essentially will not be able to authenticate against a domain controller, won't be able to log in, you won't be able to use permissions. All of the stuff that you've set up around your users, your computers, your security groups, your servers, all of that goes away. So it's always good practice to have more than one domain controller on a network. So an example in my case, if I go into the Start menu, there's an Active Directory here, a section here called Domains and Trusts. Not Domains and Trusts, I apologize. Sites and Services. And once that opens up, sometime soon, you'll see that under Sites, you've got default site name and then servers. And then you'll see that I have two DCs listed in here, DC Servo 1, DC Servo 2. And they're actually set within this Sites and Services area within Active Directory. Now, we're not going into too much detail around this, but it's good practice to check this out, make sure that it's kept up to date. This is a little bit more of a senior AD administrator task. So if you're wanting to get into that and learn more about that, understanding this, because you also need to add some subnets into here. You can actually go and create new subnets to control all of your subnets, or at least understand all the subnets that are in your network and manage them in here, at least from a AD sites and services perspective. And then your servers. Okay, so when you add a brand new domain controller, let's say you've built your first domain controller, it's all good. You then go and build a second domain controller. It'll automatically get tied into your existing domain if you set it up that way. And then they'll both show up in here, and they will generally be kept in sync so that if the primary domain controller goes down, the secondary domain controller kicks in and does what it needs to do. So it's good practice to have two or more domain controllers. Now, here's another scenario. Let's say you're working in a business where you have two offices. Okay, I've got Office 1 and I've got a DC Serve 01 built, domain controller built in that office. And then I've got an Office 2. Both these offices are connected to each other on the network, perhaps via a dedicated tunnel over a VPN, whatever it may be. And Office 2 connects over to the domain controller in Office 1. So all the users in Office 2 connect to Office 1 domain controller. What if that link is terminated? What if the VPN cuts out? What if there's some sort of network connection issue, or there's no internet, whatever it may be? Then users in Office 2, devices in Office 2, printers, anything else, servers, maybe there are servers there as well, have lost now connection to the domain controller. So, good practice, build yourself a DC Serve 02, a secondary domain controller in Office 2, if you can do that. And now all of your devices on your Office 2 location should authenticate first against your local domain controller first. This is where the DNS, primary and the alternate, come into place. What you would do is you'd reverse them. Your alternate is actually now your primary, because your primary in Office 2 is the domain controller 2, because it's part of Office 2. And then if that one is unavailable, then you go and try to do Office 1 DC or DNS. So it's always good practice to have more than one. If you're in a much larger organization, an organization that has multiple sites across a country, across the world, you're going to have a larger pool of domain controllers. It's not just for redundancy, but it's also for load balancing. There's a lot of queries that the domain controller is accepting and rejecting and querying and doing a lot of stuff in the background around Active Directory. So you don't want to put all that load on one domain controller. You've got potentially thousands of users across the world. You don't want them all querying the one single domain controller. So spread the love, spread the load across multiple domain controllers, spread across multiple sites. So that gives you a bit of an overview around the importance of having multiple DNS as well as multiple domain controllers to make sure that you have a redundant Active Directory network and to ensure that you've got proper load balancing across that network as well.